Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is a pleasure for me to speak today on an issue that is so important to the people I represent in North Island Powell River. My riding's history is defined by its surrounding marine environment. The ocean is important to our culture, our economy, and our identity. The richness and biodiversity provide enormous potential for both present and future generations. It provides numerous opportunities for commercial, recreational, and Aboriginal fisheries, tourism, transportation, education, and biological research. Today, I am happy to be speaking on C-55, an Act to amend the Oceans Act and the Canadian Petroleum and Resources Act. This Act deals with Marine Protection Areas, or MPAs for short. Despite supporting this bill, I hope to convey in the latter part of my speech that we, New Democrats, have serious questions about this bill. We need to be proactive in our conservation efforts to protect marine ecosystem functions, species, and habitats for future generations. Many ecosystems are under threat. A healthy and productive ecosystem is key to achieving sustainability in the harvest of living ocean resources. In 2010, Canada agreed to marine conservation targets established under the United Nations Conventions on Biological Diversity to conserve 10% of coastal and marine areas through effective management networks of protected areas and other affected area-based conservation measures by 2020. The commitment was reconfirmed in 2015 by the United Nations General Assembly's 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Since signing in 1992, the Convention on Biological Diversity, Liberal and Conservative governments have dragged their feet. So where are we today? Canada has only protected 1.5% of its oceans with the marine protected areas. Canada ranks near the very bottom in protecting our ocean biodiversity, falling behind China at 1.6% and Japan at 5.6%. Australia and the United States have come out on top, with 33.2% and 30.4% protected, respectively. The current process establishing and managing MPAs under the Oceans Act is long and tedious. My support for this bill is based on the fact it provides some new legal tools to speed up the creation of marine protected areas. Specifically, it empowers the minister to designate marine protected areas by order and prohibit certain activities in those areas. This bill will clarify the role of the Ministry of Fisheries and Oceans in establishing a national network on MPAs. As a country, we are still falling short of our international commitments to protect our marine biodiversity. I see this as an accountability measure. When Canada fails to meet our targets, rest assured, Minister, that the responsibility will fall solely on your shoulders. There is no more time for excuses. Bill C-55 increases ministerial powers to terminate private resource interests in MPAs and creates stronger penalties for those found violating the rules. Specifically, it updates and strengthens the power of enforcement officer. It updates the Act's offence provisions, in particular to increase the amount of fines and to provide that ships may be subject to the offence provisions and create new offences for a person or ship that engages in prohibited activities within a marine protected area. The issue of enforcement officers is one of large concern in my riding. Madam Speaker, many Indigenous communities I represent have come to me wanting to do more than just watch what happens in the oceans in their traditional territories. They want to help. Repeatedly, these communities have talked to the Minister's office about resources to train their people to support the protection and defence of their traditional lands. Madam Speaker, I think this must be an area where the Minister's office starts to move forward. I think of the multiple spills in the ocean in my riding, for example. The Indigenous people were there immediately, and with the proper training could have supported the tracking of the impact, which we have actually very little information on. Protecting our oceans must include the people who have lived on the land from time immemorial. As far as the MPA minimum standards go, these steps are steps in the right direction. But to have a complete picture, one must look at what the MPAs really do. In the context, we're not talking about marine protected area. In a generic context, we're referring specifically to the DFO program under the Oceans Act. A marine protected area is an area of sea that forms part of the internal waters of Canada, the Territorial Sea of Canada or the Exclusive Economic Zone of Canada, and has been designated under the section for special protection. While this lofty definition to increase conservation is wonderful, there is little backing up how it will be done. Let me explain. This bill fails to set minimum protection standards and targets for zoning for marine protected areas, which renders the designation inconsistent at best and meaningless at worst. A lack of minimum protection standards for MPAs make the rules so inconsistent and permissive that most MPAs allow commercial fishing, and one even allows oil and gas exploration. I don't know about you, but I think oil and gas extraction is not compatible with conservation and should never be permitted inside a protected area. Take national parks. They've got standards. Why can't our marine areas have the same? According to Rudolph de Villers, professor of geography from Memorial University, quote, "Scientific studies have shown again and again that stricter protection provides greater biodiversity benefits," end quote. Canada needs to set strong protection standards in line with the International Union of the Conservation of Nature and set legislated protection targets if it is to meet its international commitments. At present, just over 1% of Canada's oceans are protected, an area just a bit larger than Nova Scotia. And only a tiny portion of our ocean, approximately 0.01%, is highly protected, meaning no fishing or oil and gas extraction is allowed inside the MPA. By not setting minimum protection standards, the Liberals are trying to appear progressive by almost meeting targets, but have not made the hard choices to protect biodiversity. This is not just the NDP bringing this important issue up. Widespread opposition from environmentalists have raised the issue, from the WWF to CPAWS. 15 university scientists from St. John's to Victoria have written to both the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans and the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, asking for stiffer conservation measures in Canada's 12 marine conservation areas, as well as those being proposed in the future. According to Linda Nolan, Staff Counsel, West Coast Environmental Law, quote, "These proposed amendments are useful short-term additions to the Federal Oceans Act and related oil and gas laws, but they could and should go much farther." And in a second quote, "For the long arm of the law to be truly effective, we need stronger legal powers like minimum protection standards and requiring ecological integrity as foremost priority in the MPA management. With a vast area in these three seas within our boundaries, the world's longest coastline, Canada must implement a forceful, modern Oceans Act," end quote. Bill C-55 gives the minister far too much latitude to decide what activities are permissible in an MPA. The minister has the authority to list all of the permissible activities that are ongoing activities in the marine protected area. The minister can repeal the order that designated marine protection areas in the first place just 5 years later. Liberals promised on ocean protection and environmental protection. They are still mostly just talk. Canadians don't want to see more Harper targets and exemptions for oil and gas sector. I don't think we can discuss the protection of the environment without the involvement of coastal First Nations. They are important parties in the decisions about how to conserve marine biodiversity and the resources in BC. As BC's First Peoples, coastal First Nations have a long-standing historical connection to the ocean and its resources. While First Nations community conservation areas have potential to contribute to the MPA network goals, in most cases these areas will not qualify as MPAs according to the definition. Bill C-55 makes no mention of this specifically, but I know how important sustaining biodiversity of our coastal communities are, especially the ones that I represent. Madam Speaker, in my riding, many First Nations communities are spread across some of the most remote and beautiful places. They live on the ocean and are already doing the important work. An increase in training to support them in protecting the ocean just makes sense. In my concluding remarks, I would like to ask the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans to take a stand and listen to experts, amend this Act to include minimum standard to marine protection areas. Our planet deserves it. I also hope that the Liberal government will finally fully implement the Cohen Commission. In my riding, there are serious concerns being raised about fish farms. This was a promise.
Unfortunately, the member's time is up, and maybe she could finish her thought through the questions and comments. Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Barrie Innisfil.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The honourable member, and I appreciate her speech today, could speak to the issue and the concerns that exist among these coastal communities about the impact that the minister is going to have with respect to interim protection orders. We're hearing a lot of feedback from residents in Nunavut, for example, and I'm sure that she's hearing from some of the BC coastal communities as well. So I'm just wondering if she can comment on some of those concerns that she's heard. Thank you.
The honourable member for North Island, Powell River.
Well, Madam Speaker, I thank the member for the question. And I think that the concerns that are growing around all the issues in the ocean just continue to grow. What we've seen from this government is a lot of promises with very little action. You know, my honourable member before me in his speech talked about the amount of plastics in the ocean. And I can share with this House how many groups in my riding collect large amounts of plastic and debris from the beach, how many organizations work, and I think about how many times I've gone out with them and how small those plastics already are on the sand. I can't imagine the impacts on the ocean. So, you know, I think we need to be really looking at some solid action, which we still are waiting for from this government.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de Salaberry-sur-Rouen.
Présidente, je remercie ma collègue pour son discours qui est vraiment passionné pour la protection de nos aires de protection marine. On voit que le Canada a fait à peu près pas d'efforts. On est un pays où il y a à moins de 1,5% de nos zones de protection marine, de nos eaux qui ont été protégées, et on espère en protéger, je pense, 30% d'ici 2020. C'est vraiment impensable. Quand on dit que les libéraux se sont fait élire en se vantant qu'ils allaient mettre de l'avant les changements climatiques, qu'ils allaient se battre, qu'ils allaient faire une différence par rapport aux conservateurs, et là, même Environnement Canada a établi que les émissions de GES, en fait, on s'en allait vraiment pour ne pas réussir à rejoindre nos cibles de réduction de GES, et qu'il n'y avait même pas de plan pour les réduire. Donc, pas capable de réduire les GES, on augmente le nombre de pipelines, on n'a pas de normes standards de protection pour les régions marines. Il y a encore des subventions dans les combustibles fossiles. Alors, comment on va faire pour vraiment être des leaders et des gens qui ont de la vision si on n'est pas capable de mettre tous ces projets de loi-là? Et si en plus le projet de loi C-55 est encore rempli de lacunes pour faire en sorte qu'on puisse vraiment aller de l'avant et protéger notre environnement?
Member for North Island, Powell River.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for this important question. The reality is, across my riding, people are very concerned about the impacts on the ocean, the impacts of climate change, and we know that our oceans are such an intrinsic part of keeping the temperatures down in our planet. And we're not serving our oceans, and this government is not serving our oceans the way that they should. You know, we want to see actual actions. We can't just say things, and that's what we're hearing from the Liberal government. A lot of really meaningful promises with very little meaningful action. So we're asking for the next step. We're asking in this bill, we hope that the committee will listen and really take some steps at giving teeth to this so that we actually see that profound action that is so required in our country. Thank you.
Question, the honourable member for North Okanagan, Shuswap.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member from North Island, Powell River, for her speech this morning on this topic. I'm just wondering if I haven't heard from her yet this morning about what she's heard from the fishermen in her area. She lives in a coastal area. Fishing is very important. I know we've heard from the Pacific halibut fishermen that they're very concerned about some of these MPAs closing off some highly productive halibut fishing areas, and that would push them into less productive areas, spending more time in the water, risking their time and burning more fuel, etc. It's causing great concern for them. I'd like to hear her comments on that.
Brief answer from the member for North Island Powell River.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I've definitely heard from many sectors and industries across my riding. And I think the point of consultation is very important. But I also know that the people that work in the ocean, that harvest from the ocean, want to make sure that there is protection so that they can see long-term growth. They want to see their businesses last a long time. And so let's make sure there's meaningful consultation, but let's make sure that we protect our oceans and the industries that grow from it. Thank you.